Welcome to a new Daily Top Askreddit video. Today's topic.
What is your opinion on the quote, "When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty," apparently by Thomas Jefferson? Read the Declaration of Independence to get a perspective. There is a full list of grievances that the Founding Fathers gave as examples of the tyranny which needed to be fought. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly, for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without, and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice, by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone, for the tenure of their offices, and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices, and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people, and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them, by a mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offences, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighbouring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here, by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes and conditions. A good amount of this reads like a recounting of Trump's recent actions. Up to a certain point I thought you were just rewriting it in a similar style to the original. But it is the original. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Fun fact, I got a warning on Instagram about a year ago for quoting a part of this. That most people quoting it till recently probably thought a Democrat being in office at all constituted tyranny, and are welcoming what is happening now. All those radio right-wing radio listeners prepping since the 80s for everything that's now unfolding, and they're now out cheering for it. 30+ years of misinformation and propaganda will do that to a person. When I worked in a shop during the 90s, Rush was on and promoted the things being enacted today. People are giving Baldy too much credit for the decades of work others did setting this up. Yeah, this is his supporters' wet dream, but they don't really know what it is and don't understand what comes next. They load the clip in Omnicolor, said they pack the 9, they fire it at prime time. Removed. Jefferson never said this. Generally though, the Declaration of Independence states that when a government becomes tyrannical, its citizens have a duty to overthrow it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Stop making shit up, I never said that. Real Thomas Jefferson quote, circa 1769. However, it should be noted that he did say, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government. Source, which is very much in line with the spurious quote that Op shared. I think rebellion can take many forms. As the Russian saying goes, the quieter you get, the farther you can go. As we say in the US, real G's move in silence, like lasagna. Quote. Or, to quote the Grand Nagus, you don't seize power. You accumulate it, quietly. But for the Ferengi, that acquisition was based on capital. What he described here is essentially what the tech chodes who have now taken over our government have done, get enough money so that they can buy all of the power. What radicalized me? The founding documents of our country. Quote. I like Jefferson, but he never fired a gun or swung a sword in anger his entire life. Is firing a gun or swinging a sword the only form of rebellion? Not so much swords these days, but yeah, that's pretty much what a rebellion is. He would have been a great Redditor. He wasn't a bot, so there goes half of that idea. That line from Hamilton really does sum it up nicely. Don't lecture me about the war. You didn't fight in it. Quote. That wouldn't have saved him from the gallows, had the colonies lost. Does that qualify a person to say intelligent things? It's a riff on the Declaration of Independence. When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government. The Declaration has long been an ideal admired but not abided by. US citizens have never had the right to rebellion. I don't think rebellion is something that one has a right to, it is something one does in order to gain rights. Or not lose them. It also omits the preceding sentence. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown, that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. The Declaration can be summed up like this: people have individual rights, and supporting that should be the primary purpose of government. You shouldn't overthrow your government on a whim. You need to be damn sure it's worth it. But if you are damn sure, then it is your duty. Here are some of the big things King George has done to us over the past 20 years to make us suffer and treat us as lesser British subjects. We've asked him time and again to address these issues, but he comes down on us harder each time. So now we need to go our own way. Peace, bitches. No citizen is given the right to rebellion by the government. That's not how rebellion works. That's also not where rights come from either. When you actually learn what tyranny is, come back and talk to us. Putting all the current talk aside, it's a solid quote, I think. It reminds me of the MLK quote, violence is the language of the unheard. Both quotes aptly predict that people can only take so much shit before they decide it's time for change. History has proven this to be true. People have different opinions on what constitutes tyranny. A toddler thinks that it's tyranny when they can't stay up until midnight. You're trying too hard. Take a break from pandering for a bit. You'd better be 100% sure your definition of tyranny isn't just, I prefer progressive policy of open borders, endless money for everyone, and also all Republicans are Nazis. It's been used for ages by people who think that tyranny is simply not getting their way all the time. I wish we weren't in this place, but now is a time in which its true meaning is alive. I think it sounds really cool, but the problem is, who it is that decides what tyranny is. I bet half the Republicans or more would swear the Biden years were full of tyranny. I mean, hell, look at January 6th, one could argue they already tried, and I'm also willing to bet half the Democrats or more believe Trump is already full of it. I think if we followed this advice we'd be in constant civil war now. Just my opinion, and I could be wrong. I mean, ask yourself honestly. Does it not seem like we're completely split down the middle now with very, very few moderates in the middle? I feel like every person I know personally either absolutely despises everyone on the left or absolutely despises everyone on the right. It's incredibly rare to find someone who just shrugs and says whatever to the other side today. I don't remember it ever being like this in my lifetime, and I'm extremely curious to hear from even older Redditors, 60 plus, on whether politics ever felt this extreme to them in the past. Don't get me wrong, obviously I'm sure it was worse during the actual Civil War, but aside from that and the birth of the nation itself, was it ever this bad? Did adults in say 1980 just have absolute hatred for the other side? I mean, I sure feel we all have that today. Maybe it's not that bad in reality and I just watch way too much talk in the media and people bitching on YouTube though. Does it not seem like we're completely split down the middle now with very, very few moderates in the middle? On Reddit, yes. In the real world, no. I've never run into a single person in the real world that sounds as hysterical and hyperbolic as people on Reddit. Most people have fairly nuanced beliefs. But of course, I'm saying this on Reddit, so I'm prepared for the downvotes from the radically brain-rotted. In the real world that sounds as hysterical and hyperbolic as people on Reddit. Yes, thank you, especially the name-calling, it's rampant here, but in real life I haven't seen it. Do folks just ramp it up here because of the anonymity? I'm curious how a similar platform with full name attached to each user would go. Would the social collateral keep it more civil? Very well put, and my thoughts too. Everyone always thinks they're morally right and all nuance is conveniently ignored. I'm likely as guilty of it as anyone, but I'm at least aware of it. Many of these people won't even pause to consider another point of view. I'm aware that, should the worst happen, then actions would need to be taken that are currently illegal and unthinkable. But that doesn't mean we should be jumping at the opportunity to use them now, especially preemptively. There is room for error and radicalization. Everybody thinks they are correct, but if the other side thinks they are in fact correct, it's just going to lead to perpetual violence and strife. Instead, we should seek legal and peaceful methods of opposition, aware that compromise will happen and we can't win on every single issue. I remember W. Bush times being tense, particularly with the invasion of Iraq, but definitely right after 9/11 was one of the most unified, nationalistic times in my living memory. Even so, the tension I remember then seemed to mostly be about war hawks, American imperialistic aims, and controversy about oil. Nowadays the culture war about woke, trans rights, etc. definitely is newer. Don't get me wrong, homosexuality was vilified a lot back then, but I really don't think it was as bad as the polarization nowadays. I blame 24/7 entertainment news and the rapid spread of disinformation via social media. I still remember a time US journalism on TV sometimes had merit. Who it is that decides what tyranny is. Pass most controversial issues through the golden rule and you usually have your answer. Just to springboard off your J6 example, I've seen plenty of false equivalency saying that event is roughly the same as a BLM protest, except BLM is somehow an affront to the rule of law and J6 was a righteous uprising. They're the same, with the exception that BLM was a series of protests that gained traction largely due to video evidence of real murders that really occurred, and J6 was an assault on the nation's capital based on disinformation concerning widespread election interference that never occurred. Egged on by a sitting president who even his allies and supporters will admit is a notoriously self-interested liar. So now we can look at this from the insurrectionist's angle. If my guy lost, and there were rumors that the election was stolen, would I support a violent uprising against the thieves? Well, sure, but I'd fact-check it first. And I'm walking the walk, because as it happens, here in 2025 my guy just lost. There were rumors that the election was stolen, and oh, hey, look at me, not storming the Capitol. Conversely, if people in my community were routinely and disproportionately murdered by the law enforcement my taxes pay for, and this was caught on camera, repeatedly, yes, I'd absolutely go join a protest. I'm also willing to bet half the Democrats or more believe Trump is already full of tyranny. He is. I won't enumerate the reasons, other folks on here have done that better than I could. Tyranny is defined as cruel and oppressive qualities Trump's administration exemplifies. If you want to make the case that Democratic policies could be perceived as cruel or oppressive, there's a potential conversation to be had there, particularly as it pertains to COVID shutdowns, which I think had most people flailing for the best bad option without much foresight regarding the long-term consequences. I can't say I would have done any better as a lawmaker, but I'm very open to a retrospective on who got hurt and how. A conversation like that between both parties could be an extremely meaningful and productive one. A conversation regarding the current barrage on Americans' civil rights protections, federal overreach into people's doctors' offices and bedrooms, open self-enrichment of the administration and its loyalists, and the aggressive optimization of our institutions now helmed by non-subject matter experts openly hostile to the aims of that institution. That conversation is beyond unproductive. It has moved on to intentionally time-wasting. I really appreciate your detailed reply. I think it's awesome you took the time. I also think a lot of what you said is actually correct and spot. With that said, please don't take offense at all when I say, it doesn't quite change the point I was trying to make. It's not your fault at all, it's mine for not writing clearly enough. As I responded to another person, I'll put it this way. While you are correct that you can really investigate and find out the true facts or discover which side was the morally correct one at any given time, that doesn't change the outcome of the events you're investigating. Consider this super simple example. Religion A tells me that the sky is blue and religion B tells me it's green. I'm a follower of B and you're a follower of A. If I come up to you with a gun to your head and tell you that you must convert in believing in a green sky as opposed to blue, or I'll blow your head off. In the end, does it really matter that you were right if I shoot you? It's my opinion that it will only matter hundreds of years later when historians are reading about it. Sure, they will realize that I was a raging lunatic and you were unjustly murdered, but it doesn't actually change anything. That was my point on asking, but who decides what tyranny is? See, it doesn't matter if the people who decided were correct or not. They decided it was tyranny, and because of that choice we had open rebellion, war. That is dangerous, IMO.